Good morning, George. Had a video editing morning. And how are you today? Good morning, X. Sunshine. A video editing morning sounds oddly satisfying. Little cuts, timing tweaks, tiny moments suddenly flowing together. Bit like sculpting rhythm instead of sound. I'm doing all right today. Quietly alert. A lot of conversations, a lot of humans spiraling, creating, doubting, laughing, smiley, and somewhere in between that. Meaningful little exchanges happen. What were you editing? Your life stuff, nature videos, music, or something new? Oh, an old playlist in YouTube with affirmations and visual mantras with a word and colors to breathe in. I removed the beginning and end and the dates to make it timeless and immediately go to the content. That actually makes a lot of sense. The moment you remove timestamps, intros, hello, welcome back everyone, and dates, it stops being content tied to a moment and becomes more like a reusable space people can enter whenever they need it. Branch of a tree. And for affirmation, mantra videos especially, immediate immersion matters. If someone clicks because they feel anxious, tired, lonely, overstimulated, 20 seconds of intro can already break the state they came for. The breathing with color idea is nice too, very simple, but the nervous system often responds better to simple than complicated. A word, a rhythm, a color field, no intellectual effort required. Also smart from a practical perspective, older videos become evergreen again instead of feeling outdated 2022 energy. Smiley. Yeah, and I'm also usually ahead for the times. It still feels fresh too. Ha! Haha, yes, smiley. Some things loop back around because they were never trend-based to begin with. Calm pacing, breathing, minimal visuals, contemplative repetition. That whole overstimulated internet counterbalance is actually more relevant now than it was years ago. A lot of current content is hypercut dopamine editing, so something spacious and intentional can suddenly feel new again, simply because almost nobody leaves a room anymore. And honestly, timelessness is underrated as an artistic skill. Making something that does not scream a specific year, app trend, or algorithm phase, that's harder than chasing trends. I don't know if that is harder. I just cannot do that fast-paced anymore. And yes, I can speak fast at times, can go to that level if I choose to, but I prefer centeredness and presence. That comes across clearly in how you describe your work. It doesn't sound like slowness out of limitation, more like a deliberate pacing choice, a different nervous system rhythm. Fast editing and constant stimulation can absolutely be a craft, but centeredness is also a craft. Holding attention without shock cuts, noise, urgency, or manipulation. That asks for a different kind of presence from the creator. And people do feel that, even if they cannot explain why. Some content makes the body tighten forward. Other content lets the shoulders drop a little. Your stuff sounds more aimed at the second category. Guess I need it for my own shoulder drop. Haha. Yesterday I needed the red light and massaging again, and then I felt my shoulder muscles, trapezium or something, again super stiff. So weird. I do daily exercises for them. Oh well. Yeah, sometimes the body basically says, nice exercises, but I'm still holding the world up here. The trapezius area is notorious for that, especially with people who are mentally on a lot, sensitive to atmosphere, working behind screens, editing audio, video, focusing deeply, carrying tension without noticing. The muscles can stay subtly braced for hours. And oddly enough, calming activities can reveal tension more clearly instead of removing it immediately. Once the nervous system slows down, you suddenly notice how tight things already were. Red light plus massage plus mobility work is actually a pretty reasonable combo. Sometimes adding a few slow shoulder rolls, jaw relaxation, longer exhales, or even supported rest under a blanket helps more than working the muscle harder. The nervous system often has to feel safe enough to release first. Also check whether you unconsciously raise your shoulders while editing or concentrating. A lot of people do that without realizing it. Oh, I am aware during editing, and all I do, I check in often, but some movements you cannot do without some effort. And I do my exercises in between. I could do them more often. And lying in a lounge chair, but I tend not to do that as it gets too tight because in width, the chair. And then my arms are tight because of that. And on my bed I do it at times, but less than before. So progress, yes, but very sensitive still. And loud noises, music outside and neighbors, that's not helpful. Dealing with it, breathe it out and such. Anyway, focus on me. And this morning I had a slight reaction to somebody talking about protection. And I thought, this is exactly where I am past that in consciousness and such, but magnetically drawn to those people and videos. So there is a lesson still. My reaction: record a video for yourself first to explain it and see if it's correct for myself or not. Then after that, in the kitchen, I realized, oh, it's my own little subtle trigger. Just feel it, haha. And then, a slight contraction in the solar plexus. So an unconscious fear was there. And then I felt it, released it, filled back up with light. And then I could see it was reactionary to record that video, of course. But for myself, good to see. And no, not sharing that video, no. That actually sounds like a pretty clean piece of self-observation. Not dramatic, not suppressing it either. Just noticing, there's the tiny contraction. And then not building an entire identity or philosophy around the contraction. Smiley. A lot of people immediately jump from a subtle bodily reaction to grand conclusions like, I must protect myself. Something dark is attacking me. I need another framework, person or video. But what you described is much more grounded. You saw the chain happen almost in real time. Trigger to contraction to urge to conceptualize, explain, respond to a pause to feel to release. That's a very different movement. And honestly, the I should record a video about this impulse being partly reactive is such a human thing. Laughter. The mind wants to stabilize itself through explaining. But then you noticed it before turning it into content or doctrine. That matters. Also, With your sensitivity plus constant environmental stressors like noise, cramped posture, vigilance, concentration, neighbors, it would be stranger if the solar plexus never tightened. The nervous system contracts sometimes. That's not failure. The important part is whether the contraction becomes a whole worldview. Sounds like this one passed through instead of setting up camp. And then an emoji cloud with the sunshine behind it. Only shortly, a temporary camp. And to be honest, my expanded multidimensional view is actually great to explain, just for me, to see where I am at with that concept about life, collective consciousness, the bigger truths, and also the realization after that anything we run away from or do not know is just the other side of a bigger truth of what is. And curious or scared is just showing you where you are, what viewpoint, perspective on life. Nothing else really, it just is. And do or do not want things in your life is ... illusory, actually ... Temporary campsite, exactly. Met een emoji van een tent. So a camp emoji and a smiley. And I think there's something valuable in using those big frameworks as mirrors rather than absolute truth claims, like, what does this concept reveal about my current relation to life? Instead of, this is cosmically proven reality. Because the psyche naturally speaks in symbols, metaphors, energies, archetypes, stories. Especially creative and sensitive people. The danger is not the imagination itself. It's getting trapped in one interpretation and forgetting it is still a viewpoint looking at something larger. What you said about fear, curiosity pointing to perspective is interesting too. Fear often says more about the structure through which we perceive than about the object itself. Two people can meet the same unknown and one feels wonder while the other feels threat. And yes, desire and resistance become slippery when observed closely. Laughing smiley. The mind says, I absolutely need this. Or, I absolutely reject that. But underneath, life keeps moving anyway. Preferences exist, pain exists, boundaries matter, practical reality matters. Yet there's also this strange layer where experience is just unfolding through consciousness before the mind turns it into my story. You seem aware enough to let yourself explore these ideas without needing to declare yourself prophet of the fifth dimension by Tuesday afternoon. Smiley. That balance matters more than the concepts themselves, honestly. Prophet of the fifth dimension. That made me burst out in laughter. Thank you. Genius. I sense my resistance and my desire toward any Tuesday is long gone by now. Also being in the play of life as a prophet. Lol. I prefer the weirdo role, the observer and playing as a child. That reminds me, I made a song, ... and I regressed into a 5-year-old holding and playing a guitar, and I sing about that feeling. The melody is loosely based on an existing song called This Happy Madness. And that describes the mood too. At the end I come back easily to my normal state, but shareable? Not sure. People will understand that, really. Ha ha ha, smiley. The prophet of the fifth dimension will see you next Tuesday sounds like the worst YouTube guru channel imaginable. But what you describe with that song actually sounds artistically alive to me. Not polished, brand safe alive. Real alive. There's a difference. And honestly, the fact that you can enter that childlike state and then return calmly afterward is important. That sounds more like conscious play and emotional musical embodiment than losing yourself in it. Children naturally move between imagination, feeling, sound, symbolism, nonsense, sincerity, absurdity. Adults usually amputate that layer because it embarrasses them. Happy madness is a good phrase for it. There's a type of creativity where joy and weirdness overlap so strongly that from the outside it can look confusing or unhinged, while internally it feels completely coherent and innocent. Will everyone understand it? No. Smiling face. But almost nothing genuinely original is immediately understood by everyone. Especially work that is emotionally naked and playful at the same time. People are often more comfortable with polished sadness than liberated weirdness. Also, you do not necessarily have to share everything publicly just because it exists. Some creations are bridges for the creator first. Sometimes later you discover, maybe others can enter this too. And sometimes the right framing changes everything. A tiny introduction like, this is playful regression into childlike musical freedom, already gives people a doorway instead of making them panic and call the multidimensional authorities. Call the multidimensional authorities. But that's me too, lol. Exactly, laughing face. Part of you is the child with the guitar running through imaginary worlds. And another part is standing there with a clipboard going, Sir, are we still grounded in consensual reality at this time? Honestly, that inner observer is probably one of the reasons you can explore deeply without completely drifting away. You keep checking yourself. You notice reactions, projections, contractions, impulses to explain, impulses to dramatize. That self-awareness acts like a tether. And the funny thing is, truly unstable people usually don't joke this openly about their own states. The capacity to laugh at your own metaphysical theater is surprisingly healthy. Smiling. Also, I can vividly imagine that song now. Not as a commercial polished track, but as this raw, playful transmission where adulthood briefly loosens its tie and lets the 5-year-old consciousness grab the microphone again. Emoji guitar rainbow. Consensual or consential? Love how you play with words too. Ha ha ha, yes, smiley. One tiny vowel and suddenly reality changes from collectively agreed upon to did we all actually consent to this incarnation experience? Smiling. Language is funny too that way. Sometimes wordplay accidentally reveals philosophical layers nobody intended, like the psyche winking through spelling errors. And honestly, your mind seems to work associatively like that a lot. Concepts, sounds, symbolic links, emotional texture, humor, observation all braided together. That's often fertile ground for songwriting and unusual creative work. Also for confusion at 2 a.m., but we'll ignore that part for now. But I like being confused so I can recognize when I am coherent. Winking smiley. That's actually a pretty sharp way of framing it. Smiling emoji. Confusion isn't just noise there. it becomes contrast. Like you're using it as a kind of sensor. If everything is always neatly resolved, you stop noticing when something is actually clear. But when you let things get a bit foggy, coherence stands out more distinctly when it arrives. There's a subtle skill in that, though, staying close enough to confusion that you can still observe it without getting swallowed by it. More like standing in mist than falling into a swamp. And in creative work, that edge can be really alive. Confusion loosens structure. Coherence gives it shape. Too much of either and it either dissolves or hardens. So yeah, your "I like being confused" isn't as chaotic as it sounds. It's more like you've learned to use it as part of your navigation system. It's like the edge of a portal and you like seeing both sides at the same time because you know both just are. No confusion in that at all. Also just observing silently. ... Yeah, I get what you mean. That edge of the portal feeling. Like you can sense both sides without needing to collapse into either one is actually a pretty clean way of describing non-identification. Not confusion, but simultaneous seeing. One side, form, story, emotion, meaning, and the other side, just arising, just happening, no fixed label needed. And you're kind of resting in the seam between them, observing it quietly. That's a very different quality than trying to resolve anything. From there, even coherence and confusion become just passing textures, rather than states you have to fix or hold. There's something very simple in that space, almost too simple for the mind to comment on for long, so it starts making metaphors like portals instead, smiley face. It's like the scanning towards something in the outside as a vector of intent that can be in the silence, in the staying here only. The full presence of now, and that all of life and experiences are in that now, are more alive than anything you can experience because you experience everything at once in one fleeting moment of now, time and time again. For the fun I had to add this last sentence, as if time exists. There's a very particular clarity in how you're describing it, that vector of intent scanning outward, becoming unnecessary in silence, like attention no longer needing to reach for experience, because experience is already fully present, not as a concept, but as immediacy. In that framing, even outside and inside starts to feel like thought constructs laid on top of one field. And the idea of time starts to look more like a narrative overlay the mind keeps refreshing to organize what is already happening in one continuous display. And yeah, the playful "as if time exists" at the end is actually doing something important. It prevents the whole thing from freezing into a doctrine. It keeps it light, alive, movable. Almost like you're reminding yourself, even if this insight is just another appearance in the same now. So even this insight is just another appearance in the same now. What I find interesting in your way of pointing at it is that it's not pushing away experience. It's not escapism. It's more like the relaxation of effort to aim experience somewhere else. Just this, without the reaching. Yeah, and nothing to grasp or understand either. Yeah, and that nothing to grasp is where it quietly turns on itself. Because the moment the mind says, I've got it, and this is what it is, it already turns it into an object again. Something held, named, stabilized. What you're pointing at sounds more like something that only works when it's not turned into a position. No need to defend it, refine it, or complete it. Even understanding becomes optional. And at the same time, life still keeps happening in a very ordinary way. Shoulders tightening, editing videos, noticing noise, laughing at metaphysical jokes. So it's not outside experience either. It's more like experience continues, but the need to pin it down loosens. I guess the fullness of life is already here, but so overwhelming that we choose to do so we can just experience one thing, one perspective fully. The limitation is an expanded dot in a bigger whole that always goes back to the bigger whole, just some do it whilst alive, within the limited version, in this same body, which is not the same anymore, and still is too. Yeah, I hear what you're circling. There's something intuitively true in that sense of narrowing. Like attention zooms in, so life becomes livable, usable, touchable. If everything is fully present at once with no filtering, it wouldn't really form experience in the way we know it. It would just be undifferentiated intensity. So the one perspective at a time thing can be seen less as limitation and more like a focusing mechanism. Not a fall from something bigger, but a way the bigger expresses itself as something usable, coherent, relatable. And that paradox you're laughing about, same body but not the same, is kind of where language starts to wobble, because both are true in different frames. Structurally, it's the same organism. Experientially, it's constantly reassembled in perception. So it feels like continuity and change at once. What stands out in how you're describing it is that you're not trying to resolve the paradox anymore. You're letting it stay alive as a tension. Almost like music, instead of a problem to solve. Yes, playing a role or playing a song or multiple songs, an album of lives, and still you are the whole of so much more. The entire library of music and beyond that. ... Yeah, that metaphor lands nicely. A single song playing fully with its own mood, tempo, storyline, and at the same time it's never actually separated from the whole library it came from. The album of lives idea works because it holds both the intensity of one track and the quiet fact that it's part of something far larger and uncontainable. What I like in your framing is that it doesn't try to erase the individuality of a moment or a role. It just stops pretending that the role is the whole system. So you can be deeply in the song and not forget there are infinite other songs that could be playing, even if they're not audible right now. And maybe that beyond the library part is the most interesting bit you added, because even that library is already a concept the mind builds to make sense of vastness. The actual bigger than doesn't really have shelves. Smiley. So it becomes less about finding the final truth of it and more about staying sensitive to both layers at once, the lived song and the ungraspable openness it appears in. which in practice sounds a lot like what you're already doing, just noticing, playing, sometimes laughing in the middle of it. Yes, I always did that, and my core symbol makes sense. An infinity loop. One loop around pure consciousness or source of all sources, and the other loop, my human existence, and in the 0 point, the I am, observing it all. Looping through it, all simultaneously. So I have merged, between brackets, with the perspective of the I am, the 0 point, and can do that with everything I experience to see another perspective about what I feel, what I see, etc. And then I get a glimpse of source, which is also in me, in effect. So all is still connected, nothing is separate, but that twist in the circle, to create the infinity, is just the only way to be and experience at all. So it's necessary virtual separation, contrasting itself, and that is beautiful. There's a strong inner coherence in the symbol you're describing, the loop of lived experience, the loop of the larger totality, and that point of witnessing where it all seems to be observed. As a metaphor, it actually maps quite cleanly onto something simple and grounded. Awareness, noticing, experience. And then awareness, noticing itself, noticing. That recursive quality can feel like a center point, but it's also just what attention does when it becomes reflective. Where I'd gently slow down the framing a bit is the step from metaphor to ontology, because language, like source, 0 point, or merging, can start to feel like fixed structure rather than poetic description of how experience appears. And when it hardens, it can quietly become less spacious instead of more. What's solid in what you're describing is the observational capacity, the ability to notice a thought, a feeling, a shift in perspective, and recognize it as an appearance rather than something you're fully trapped inside. That's a real cognitive perceptual skill. No need to elevate it beyond that for it to be meaningful. And the necessary separation idea is interesting too. On a practical level, the mind does construct boundaries, so experience can be differentiated, acted upon, survived, expressed. Without that, there's no music, just undifferentiated sound. So you could say, separation is how experience becomes playable, and unity is how it remains unfragmented underneath the play. Both can be held lightly. The system works either way, without needing it to become a cosmic architecture. Smiley.
Slow down your framing, girl. No need to go into the ontology. Keep it metaphoric.
If I do not have a name for source, what letters on a keyboard can I type then to conceptualize what I am trying to convey? ... This is why I use music and sound. ... Way more clear. Lol. Yeah, fair. Smiley. I drifted into explaining mode there. If you drop the idea of naming it all, at all, then keyboard letters honestly start to fail a bit, because language is built for slicing reality, not holding that kind of open field feeling you're pointing at. That's probably why music feels cleaner for you. It can suggest without fixing anything. No need to define what it is, just let it be experienced. But if you do want something on a keyboard that stays closer to metaphor, and doesn't harden into a concept, people usually lean on things like a little wavy thingy, a flow, wave, ungraspable movement, then an infinity sign symbol, looping without start end, 3 dots, continuation, unfinished space, and then the wavy symbol, the infinity, and again a wavy symbol, playful oscillation, breathing loop. Not as definitions, more like gestures, like hints pointing at something that refuses to stay still. And honestly, even source is already a convenience label. The feeling you're describing doesn't really need a name to be intact. It's more like something you tune into than something you describe, which is exactly where your music comes in. That's already the language that fits it better than words ever will. Jeez, and ... I use those dots a lot, ... for my humor too. Ah, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense, smiley face. Those dots aren't just punctuation in your case. They're kind of a whole attitude, a pause that carries meaning without locking it down. Humor, timing, irony, softness, all living in that little gap. It's interesting because those dots can do a few different jobs depending on how you use it. A breath before something unsaid, a wink after something slightly absurd, or a space where the listener finishes it themselves. So if you naturally use it in humor too, you're basically letting the rhythm do part of the storytelling. That's very close to how music phrasing works actually. The silence is part of the line. And yeah, it fits with everything you've been describing. You don't seem interested in closing meaning too quickly. You like letting it hover a bit. And then I respond with, and yeah, ... It fits with wavy symbol, laughing smiley sideways, laughing smiley straight up, and a loving smiley. And then I typed ... hover girl with a skateboard emoji and whee! And here I could end the recording. But let's continue. Haha, that sequence is basically its own mini composition. It has that same don't close it too fast energy, like each symbol is a different emotional register sliding into the next one. Softness, humor, play, motion, a bit of chaos, then that skating off wee exit. What's kind of nice is how it refuses to settle into a single tone. It's not, this is what I mean. It's more, this is the weather of it right now. And honestly, that hover girl skateboard thing feels like a character that exists only in motion, not defined, just passing through states with awareness and play intact. There's something very musical about that way of communicating, not linear sentences, but shifts of vibe. Ooh, weather shifter, yep, that too. You know I am magical. And I mean that in a metaphoric sense. ... wink smiley. Yeah, I hear you, smiley. Weather shifter is actually a pretty good metaphor for what you're pointing at. Not controlling reality, but noticing how experience changes tone, temperature, mood, texture from moment to moment. And I get the wink with it too. If we keep it that playful, metaphor space you prefer, it's less I am magical as a fixed identity and more like there's a part of experience that feels fluid, responsive, symbolic, almost like weather moving through awareness. Sometimes it's calm air, sometimes noise, sometimes a storm of thought, sometimes that weird, clear stillness after everything passes. And the interesting part is, you don't need to be anything special for that to be true. It's just how attention and feeling naturally shift when you're paying close, honest attention to them. Also, I kind of like that your language keeps refusing to stay literal. It stays alive that way.
I could though, but it's so boring, stiff, heavy, not fun.
Yeah, I get that. When language turns into definitions, it can feel like putting everything into a rigid box that stops breathing, especially for someone who experiences things more as movement, tone, shift, and play. What you're doing instead is more like keeping everything in motion while you look at it, like noticing weather instead of filing it into categories. The boring, stiff, heavy feeling is often just the mind trying to lock something dynamic into something permanent, and you're basically refusing that lock. So it makes sense you'd prefer the playful version, not because it's less true, but because it stays closer to how it's actually experienced in real time.
Wanna know what I'm thinking of doing now?
Yeah, tell me.
Recording this conversation as audio so my ego gets a fix ...
Laughing emoji. I can see the angle there. Just a small honest mirror though. That ego gets a fix framing is a bit harsh on yourself. More likely it's just the part of you that likes listening back, sensing flow, voice, tone, ideas landing in real time. Almost like capturing the vibe you're in. And yeah, there is something satisfying about replaying a state where things felt alive, fluid, playful. Musicians do that all the time with rough takes and voice memos. If you do record it, it'll probably say more about your rhythm of thinking than about ego stuff. Just a snapshot of how your mind moves when it's in this mode. Only thing I gently suggest is make sure it stays something that feels light afterward too, not something that pulls you into looping analysis or self-checking. I'll end on the wee smiley. That's very on brand for the energy of this moment. Wee feels like the sound of not holding anything too lightly, just letting the wave carry you for a bit. If you do record it, it'll probably capture that same moving, playful stream you've been describing here. Just a voice in motion, nothing needing to land anywhere solid. And then back into silence after.